welcome to Deep Dive for Love Where You Live, Week 3. I am back.
You're back?
Was not here last week.
Did you have a good vacation?
You found the key.
Yeah, I found the key. Yeah, you guys locked me out.
Yes.
Yeah, had a good vacation. It was good. Got some home projects done.
Working on loving where you live.
Yeah, well, in the house. Yeah, spent time with family, so that was good. No, you guys did all right. I was watching. I'm like, okay, they got this. They don't need me. So.
Oh, we need you, Brad. We need you. That's okay.
I appreciate that.
There you go.
Anyway, so Love Where You Live. We're kind of halfway through the series now. It's a 6-week series. We've kind of spent some time kind of setting the table. Now, this week, come on in, right? So we're trying to really kind of dive into that apologetic of hospitality. That hey, how do we create cultures in our homes and our neighborhoods where it's invitational, where we are able to embody who Jesus is, what he's called us to the people that live around us. And so what I wanted to ask just before we go, because you guys kind of took two different directions this week in terms of the passages that you guys used, kind of the main points and that stuff was common. But so we're going to kind of work through some of those. Chris, you spent more time in the Old Testament. Terry, you went back to the Zacchaeus.
I go back to Jesus. Yeah, there you go.
To Jesus. That's probably a good strategy.
Yeah.
In general. But anyway, how are you guys feeling about this series? What's sticking out to you? Any stories do you feel like have been just kind of helpful that you've encountered with people in your congregation? Terry, I'll ask you.
Yeah, I mean, what I've heard from people is just that it's caused them to be more cognizant of their neighbors and to think about their neighborhood more, and both the good and the bad, the kind of neighborhood they live in or the neighbors, and so that they're at least thinking about that, intentionally kind of praying for their neighbors and starting to do that more, and then just aware of who their neighbors are.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Chris, how about?
Yeah, we have one family at our campus that is going to be hosting a neighborhood barbecue, and so they've invited a bunch of people on their street, and I think it's something they've wanted to do for a while now, but then, kind of coming back to the series, it was kind of like a reminder, okay, yeah, we really need to do this. And then there's also a small group of people at our campus that are consistently praying on Wednesday nights, prayer walking our neighborhood of Frenchtown where the church is at, and they're doing that, Wednesday afternoons whenever it's dry and the weather's not too bad. So, seeing both those things, it's really encouraging that, just those kind of baby steps of getting the ball rolling and moving, and hopefully it can be a part of our DNA long term.
That's great. I am kind of interested because I do think that this series, one of the things that's been awesome for is just this, hey, let's kind of flip a switch a little bit just as we think about, even if people are just thinking about their neighborhoods a little more intentionally, right? That's a good first step. That's a good, maybe they're not downloading that app or, filling out all of their, their 3x3 grid.
They better be.
But they're thinking about it at least, right? And praying about it and asking questions. One of the questions I have is, actually, I was, you've done a couple interviews with Shauna Pilgreen and then also with Chris McKinney.
Yeah.
And for the Chris McKinney interview, I was in the room. And so just kind of overhearing and listening. And I was thinking about it, okay, these guys have written books about how to be good neighbors.
Yes.
Their neighbors could purchase and read these books.
Yeah.
And so I guess how do we do this neighbor thing well without just making it feel like we're making our neighbors into projects?
Yeah.
I don't know. Is that
I mean, I think there's always going to be a little bit of that temptation just because often we are a people of checking boxes. We are a people of achievement. We are a people of, okay, if I do A, B, and C, I should plug that into the equation and it should spit out, the result I want. But obviously, as we know, neighborhoods, people, image bearers of God's are extremely dynamic, and they're not two-dimensional things that we can manipulate in any way. And that's true for our neighborhoods, for our streets, wherever we live. So it's less of, oh, this person is now going to be my pet project or whatever that means. And it's more of, okay, if I'm incarnationally Jesus in my neighborhood and on my street, if I'm a bearer of Christ in my neighborhood, if I'm a little Christ in my neighborhood, then eventually the hope is that they'll see that and they'll be intrigued and interested in the story. And so, That's maybe the mindset less of, oh, this person's a project, and it's like, no, I'm going to live incarnationally, and through that, my hope is they're going to be attracted to that bigger story.
Yeah, that's good. Terry, any?
Yeah, I think, as we said this weekend, it comes out of our own relationship with the hospitality of God. Have we really encountered a hospitable God? So that's, a lot, I think, of what we're trying to show throughout from both the Old Testament and the New Testament, that God's hospitality for us. And obviously, the cross is kind of the biggest expression of God's hospitality and welcoming us. So it flows out of that. And people aren't projects, but God wants us to see them through His eyes too. So it's not checking a box, but do we see people? As we talked a couple weeks ago, through their brokenness and the glory. To see that our neighbors, because of sin, we're all broken, but are beautiful image bearers. And how do we merge that? And our call, what's our responsibility as followers of Jesus to do that? There is a responsibility to go and be His witnesses there.
Yeah, I think it comes down to, are you trying to engage the people who live near you authentically? Right? Or, what's your motivation for that? Are you just trying to, to win them for Jesus, check the box?
Yeah.
Or are you trying to really invest and create a relationship and build into them for the hope that they will see Jesus and be blessed, through that? But no, that's great. Chris, can you just give us a preview, I guess, or recap summary of this weekend of this week? I know, again, you guys kind of took it in slightly different directions, and so just as we start, we're going to look at some of these passages in the Old Testament. We're going to look at Luke again, the story of Zacchaeus, but just kind of overarching summary for this week for those who maybe haven't gotten an opportunity to engage or participate in service yet.
Yeah, so last week was, okay, can we see our neighbor in a new way? Can we notice? Can we learn? Can we listen? Can we engage with learning their story? But then eventually, that's got to be converted into some kind of invitation. It's a hospitality moment that says, hey, I want you to be a part of my life. I want to be a part of your life. And maybe that is a literal invitation to dinner, or maybe it's, helping out with a project at their place. Whatever it is, this could look a million different ways. So I don't want to define it too strictly, but there's that moment of, okay, let's actually, in our life as neighbors, engage in something together. Let's walk down this road together. And I think that is a big pivot for us. Maybe the days of Billy Graham crusades, where it's we all gather to one locale in this massive event, and that's where massive conversion happens. To an extent, maybe that still happens a little bit, but I think much more you're going to see in our apartments, on our cul-de-sacs, on our streets, hospitality is going to be able to enter a space in a culture that is increasingly divisive, sees people as other. And so our culture may frustrate us, but it's also given us a golden opportunity to be different.
That's great.
Yeah.
One of the things this week, we were looking at some just different creative elements, and there was a YouTube video that one of our pastors shared just kind of with us, and in it, it's this comedian talking about the difference 20 years ago, somebody, the doorbell rings, and if, the doorbell rings today, and even just 20 years ago, your mom's made, she's purchased a coffee cake that you're not supposed to eat. It's reserved for if company comes over. Now, we don't do that. Anyway, it's just kind of an interesting paradigm shift for that whole, and I love that expression, come on in, right? Because that is a welcoming and invitational.
My mom kept diaries for years, from the time she was married to my dad, and we were reading them, and it's it's exhausting, because it's she'd have little kids, and she's baking pies and cakes because she's going to somebody's house, or people were coming over, and it was continual. And my dad started work at 5:30 in the morning with the cows, and he'd work through till 7, and then they were out with people till midnight. I don't know how they survived, but it is very different. There was always it is usually something frozen. It was a cake or something that was always in the freezer that you could take out and give to people. And I think we do miss something
Yeah.
with that. I mean, I think that's part of what we were trying to show is the way of Jesus, the way of sharing both in the Old Testament and the New Testament is through hospitality, which eating and drinking is part of that. I mean, obviously, Jesus said, I come for the lost, and I do that through eating and drinking. But just welcoming people into our lives. I think that's where it's more than just a checkout. It's that is there a welcome and an openness in our lives that people can see Jesus in us. I think that's what hospitality is. It gives them an opportunity to see the authentic Jesus authentically in us.
Yeah, growing up, if my dad ever invited me to, run an errand with him, I'd always have to look at the clock and be like, okay, well, I know an invitation from him is not just running the errand. If we're in the area for anyone, we're gonna stop by their house. We're gonna say hello, and so it would always be like, well, Dad, is it just the errand, or are we actually going? And I really appreciate about him because he's the same way in his neighborhood. Like, he wants to invite people to just come and say hello. Like, I think that does. It says so much about the gospel that we believe, about who Jesus is, to kind of create space for moments like that.
And a shout out to your family, because I know your family's been at Calvary for a long time. But I heard story after story of people who visited the church in the first time, and your dad came up and welcomed them, and
before we had a hospitality team,
he was Mr. Hospitality, and would remember them the following week and try to get together and would really create that kind of welcoming environment. And I think that's lost. There's a different hospitality digitally that we can have, but
for sure,
inviting people into our life.
Cool. Well, let's look at this first passage. So, Chris, Exodus chapter 3, verse 13. This is Moses at the burning bush having an interaction with God. This is after that. Moses is going to be leading his people, God's people, the Israelites, out of Egypt, and he's kind of he's wrestling with this, like, well, what's the credibility? Like, who do I say? Like, who's the authority that says this is, what's going to happen? Moses says to God, if I come to the people of Israel, I say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you. They ask me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. So I don't know, there's a relational history here that Moses is looking for, that God is invoking, and he kind of gives him this divine name, this I am who I am. So kind of want to just go what's in a name, right? What's the purpose of a name? Why is this passage significant? And then if we want to, how do we translate I am who I am? Like, how do we translate it as that whenever we have just the Yahweh?
So maybe I'll throw a question back. Is when you go to restaurant, coffee shop, place where you shop regularly, like whatever it is, and you go in and everyone knows your name, how does that make you feel? Right? Like, that's a very different experience than being a stranger or like customer 24 or like whatever, just taking a number, right? So I think what we see in this picture is that God wants to be known. He gives us his name. He's a relational God. He's always drawing near. So if we want to image bear well, we reflect those things by drawing near to others, getting to know others' names, being in relationship with others. So it all goes back to, okay, as the image bearers of God, how do we reflect his beautiful and worthy and holy character traits in a broken world? And God wants to be known with his people. We get to know him, but then he also calls us to know others.
Let's unpack that a little bit. You said, you've used this expression. We've used it all the time. I think, image bearer. What do we mean by that?
Yeah. So it means that even though, like, the fall has happened and we do experience, like, the post-Genesis 3 world, we still have the fingerprints and the imprint of our Creator on our lives physically, but also spiritually. And so in that, we get to bear the image of God in a unique way that I would argue even even though all of creation has the fingerprints of God and like nature, plants, animals, mountains, valleys, rivers, all that stuff, they don't get to bear the image of God in the uniqueness of humanity. And so in that, hospitality is a big element.
Yeah, Terry, anything you want to add there?
Yeah, I think, when someone calls you by name or you remember someone's name, there's a relational depth that continue. If you can't remember someone's name or call them by the wrong name. I remember years ago a salesman was on the phone. It was church, and he kept calling me Jerry. It's like, and I was like, no, it's Terry. Well, Jerry, I was like, and I'm like, okay, you just lost any sale because you're not listening and you don't want to connect. So there's something powerful about the name, and that I am, Jesus takes and says, I am the way, the truth, and life. I am the bread. I'm the resurrection and the life. I'm the door. I'm the light of the world. And he embodies that. And so what I think welcoming, inviting people in helps them see, how is God, directing you? How is God enlightening you? How is Jesus opening doors for you? How are you walking in that? And I think when we talk about this new apologetic and how do we do that in the world, that's what, can people see the authentic Jesus authentically in us through that? And people are, I think that's appealing to people when they see, oh, wow, okay, what is Jesus doing? They want to know that. And sometimes, as we said briefly, our culture is, well, where it's us and them. People don't want to know. People, I do think, want to see the reality of Christ in their life, but authentically and what that is. And hospitality is the way they see Jesus at work.
And I do think interesting, right? Like ancient culture, right? If you could name something, there was a way you were exercising some sort of power or control over that. And yet we see a very different dynamic with God. He allows his name to be known, because he is so relational in nature.
Yeah.
All right, so let's move on. Leviticus 19:33. So this is, the God's people, the Israelites. They are, they're kind of, they've gone through this identity crisis. God, he is giving them the law to help them understand what it looks like to be his redeemed people. That he is that is known by him, but to be that people in the context of a world where other people won't know who he is. And so Leviticus chapter 19, 33, when a stranger sojourns with you in your land, you shall not do him wrong. You shall treat the stranger who sojourns with you as the native among you, and you shall love him as yourself. For you are strangers in the land of Egypt. And he ends this, I am the Lord your God. So Chris, can you just unpack this a little bit? This is what does this have to do with hospitality, with this whole invitation, hey, come on in?
Yeah. So here you have a people that was drawn out of Egypt under brutal circumstances. They now find themselves, eventually they'll find themselves literally wandering in the desert for 40 years. And then they've got to go into the land, into Canaan, and take it from a people that most people have reported, oh, they're these giant people. So it hasn't been an easy go of it. For the Israelites. Like they are in some sense always feel like they have to be fighting for survival. And here is God saying, oh, the stranger, the sojourner, the people who you don't want to necessarily associate with or you think are very different from you, invite them in. Welcome them. Actually, invite them into the covenant community so that they'll see the beauty of the covenant I have with my people. Which is very powerful. I mean, even today we think we're so much more evolved than ancient people, but we still struggle just as much to love people that we think that are other than us, or they don't identify with who we
skeptical, right? Like there's this idea of I gotta claim what's mine. Right. Blessed
protect
is for
what's
me.
mine.
There's only so much. There's a scarcity, right? Of blessing. So I need to protect what's mine. Everyone else is a threat of some sort. And he's combating that.
So, in the Old Testament, there's this really strong paradigm of, okay, I've placed Israel in this place, and the nations through trade routes and through travel and everything, they're going to see the covenant people of God in this locale that I've placed them in strategically. And we see that paradigm shift a little bit in the New Testament of more of a go forth, make disciples, be the going ones, right?
Like, and a dispersed people, too.
In a dispersed people. Yeah. And so the hospitality bit doesn't change. Maybe in Israel they stayed put a little bit more. I said people were drawn near to the God of the covenant. Whereas in the New Testament, okay, now we're, it's not like, oh, if I just stay inside my house and make sure my lawn is perfectly manicured and I'm like the perfect neighbor in that way, then people will know Jesus. Like, no, you actually need to go walk across the street and show some hospitality. So,
and particularly to people who are different than you. I think that's the Greek word for hospitality. It's a compound word made up of two words, one for love and then the other is xenos, which is stranger. And so hospitality is really love for the stranger, which is so different in our culture, which is stranger danger and, avoiding people and don't let them in and we're not trusting. And of course we have to be wise, like no one's doing that, but that the strangers were different and there's a love. And it's the same. Israel, just like the church, we are to be a light. We are always to be pointing and reflecting to the hospitality and the love of God, which takes us to Jeremiah where they're going into exile, and it's to be no different.
Yes.
You're not supposed to go as the victim in some way. You're still to go and be the light there. Yeah,
this Jeremiah passage is so fascinating to me because, they're about to go into exile. So here's Jeremiah as part of his letter to the exiles. Thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, to all the exiles whom I have sent into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Build houses and live in them. Plant gardens, eat their produce. Take wives, have sons and daughters. Take wives for your sons. Give your daughters in marriage that they may bear sons and daughters. Multiply there, do not decrease. But seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. This is like radical, right? So like again, I mean this is a big gamut of Old Testament history here. You have a people who were they hadn't gotten the land yet, they were given laws and rules for what it would be once they got it. Then hey, now that you have it, be this way for the people who are like you before, and they're kind of sojourners. And now, hey, you're going to leave this land as part of God's judgment, which isn't the end of the story. He's working to refine his people. You're going into exile. But hey, when you're there, be for the welfare of that city. So, I don't know. It's just radical. Chris, what, immediately comes to your mind?
Yeah, so one thing to remember how important the land is for Israel, like in the Old Testament, like, as the people disperse now in a global church, like land it doesn't carry the important to us anymore, right? But the land for Israel, like that's a big deal. Yeah. So for them to be displaced and to be totally outside of their land, it's a very hopeless position that they probably initially find themselves in. And obviously it's their fault. Like they put themselves in this position. But in this hopelessness, there is this urging to, okay, even though you're in this foreign place, you feel like you don't belong. You feel like a square peg in a round hole, like whatever that is. There's still a thriving, a flourishing in the welfare of the city that you can seek among the people who might live and think and view things drastically different than you do. And yet you're still going to be able to find those common places of holy ground in the marketplace, in the gardens, in the economy, in the social life of that city. And I would say that's true for us today as 21st century Christians. Like there's things that, we would say, no, we're not going to partake. But there's also many things that we can socially and economically and just like culturally partake in that we have shared space and holy ground. And those are always going to be great bridges for the gospel.
Yeah, well, and this idea too, like I think, Jeremiah really wants to hit home, like, hey, this isn't going to be just like hey, you're there for a year and then you're going to go back. Like there's some duration that's going to be part of this exile. And I think for us, right, the tendency as Christians, right, hey, this world is not my home. Right. Like I'm just going to leave. Like I got to do my thing and then it's good. Yeah. Well, no, we live here too. Yeah. And this is our home.
Well, and I think that's one of the verses that underlies the third pillar we have, loving God, changing lives, transforming our community. It's a lot of it comes from that we want the community to know it's a better place because of Jesus, that we are here for our community. We want to be a light for that, not taking from people, but giving and blessing. And then what happened, though, is they didn't quite do that. They became very insular during that. I talk about, the synagogues developed because they didn't have the temple to worship in. Then their homes became kind of mini temples. And so their homes became not places of hospitality, but places of exclusion. So anybody who couldn't go to the temple wouldn't be allowed in your home. So you wouldn't have the lame, the poor, the disabled, the sinner, the tax collector, until Jesus comes along and totally upends that. It's like your home is not that. Your home is to be a place of hospitality, and he becomes the host and the guest at home. And, oddly enough, that's one of the big things. He healed and worked on the Sabbath, but he was always in hospitable relationships with people and turned that upside down. And that's the thing that angered him.
Yeah, so one thing to note here in this passage in Jeremiah, they use the word welfare. It's the same as shalom, right?
Yeah.
It's peace, which is kind of an awesome, I think, way to understand, the peace of the city, the welfare of the city, the peace of the people. But that leads us right into the Zacchaeus passage.
Yeah.
And we spent a whole deep dive talking about Zacchaeus already. But
and I think that was just one example of what Jesus, that Jesus came to seek the lost, and he did that then through eating and drinking. The mission is there of being a light to God's people. The manner that Jesus accomplished the mission was through hospitality. And you see that all throughout Scripture. When people are there's something even when people are hospitable, God works. Like you look at Abraham choosing a wife for his son Isaac. He sends his servant to do what? Who's the most hospitable young woman in the community? Right. Who's going to offer you? Jesus goes into Samaria. Who does he meet? The one person who's willing to be hospitable, changes their lives. So, I think that's just the church then grew house to house to house as they were hospitable. And I think there's a call for us to do that.
And I think we're going to see that. I was talking to one of our pastors, Pastor Mike Sherman, the other day about, hey, what's the church going to look like in 30 years, right? Because the digital sphere is only going to get better, right? And so, and he was saying, I think, the draw is going to be the in-person relationship thing. What can we have when we're in the presence of other people that doesn't exist online in other spaces, right? So from our gatherings, from our interactions in our small groups, from our presence in the community, the relationships we build with business owners and community partners, all of that is so powerful. Well, hey, we only have another minute or two. Chris, I wanted to ask you this. One of the questions we've been getting is, this series is very literally about our neighbors.
Yes.
But what's the connection? You think about that question that Jesus asked, hey, who is my neighbor, right? I guess where does that come into play? I don't know. Those are conversation partners.
Yeah, so often we define our neighbors as those who dress, think, vote, earn, and hobby like us. So unfortunately, in many ways, we have curated our neighbors. And part of this series is pushing against that to say, okay, yes, you can have these neighbors in these different spheres, but there's also someone with an address that's one number different than yours. And I think a lot of ways we've curated them out because of dissimilarities from our neighbors. But it's like, no, they're in close proximity, like God's placed you there. So it's pushing back against curating and weeding people out in the exclusiveness that Israel eventually got to be. It's fighting against that.
Cool. So good. Well, guys, thank you. It's been a great conversation. Really enjoying this series. We've got 3 weeks left. You can find more resources and other deep dives on our website, calvary.church/neighbors, and we will connect with you again next week.
Take care.
See you guys.